Hello everyone, I am Reason Nyengera. I hope you enjoyed the bird fair so far. Worldwide, vultures are considered to be the most threatened group of birds. Africa supports 11 vulture species, with 6 confined to African continent. 7 of these vultures are on the edge of extinction. Today we are privileged to host a panel of African vulture experts who are going to take us close to the vulture crisis in our beloved continent. Let me take this opportunity in introducing to you our guest speakers, Salisa Chandra, Dr. Roger Safford, and Dr. Joseph Onoja. Over to you, panelists.
My name is Roger Safford, and I'm speaking to you from the UK, and I'm coordinator of BirdLife International's Preventing Extinctions programme. This is our programme to conserve the world's most threatened birds. Now, sometimes we find that whole sets of birds are in serious trouble, and the vultures are a case in point. They've become arguably the most threatened group of birds in the world. This is a situation many of us could not have imagined just a few decades ago. There seem to be so many. But this makes them now into one of BirdLife's most serious concerns, and we're playing our part with many others, doing local and national projects and working internationally. We must do this for such wide-ranging species, because of course they don't respect site or country boundaries. So I'm going to start off this talk about vulture conservation by giving you some background before I hand over to my colleagues Salisa Chandra and Joseph Onoja to tell you about the situation in Africa and some of the BirdLife partner NGOs' work to tackle the problems. So thank you to the African Bird Fair and BirdLife South Africa for giving us this opportunity, and thank you to you all for listening. Now, vultures, they're magnificent, aren't they? Who could argue? They are awe-inspiring, and certainly to my eyes, they do have their own very special beauty. And they are a unique and a distinctive part of our biodiversity. But they're not just special, they're also misunderstood. And the misunderstanding is because many people don't appreciate their unique ecology and the benefits to people that this brings. Vultures are obligate scavengers. That means that they live primarily, in most cases exclusively, by this way of life. And the only vertebrates that are obligate scavengers are vultures. So alongside herbivores, predators, and the other components of the food chain, scavengers are vital. Just stop and think, imagine a world without scavengers, what that would be like. They're the vital part of our natural ecosystems. They act as nature's cleanup crew, keeping our environment free of rotting carcasses. And they're supremely adapted for doing this, not only in their physiology, with their effortless soaring flight, their powerful bills for tearing through skin, for example, or their bald heads, their feet. But also, if you could look inside, you'd find some unique features in their intestines, allowing them to digest such an unappetizing fare. Not only do they have extraordinarily acidic stomach juices, but they have a rather unique, what we call intestinal microbiome. That's the set of microorganisms that live in their gut and help them to digest what they eat. So they perform an ecosystem service. They clean up carcasses and other organic waste in the environment. And this makes them among the most directly and obviously useful of all species to humans. So the declines have been predicted to cause what we call trophic cascades. That's to do with interruption of functioning food chains and food webs, and also predicted to lead to disease outbreaks. So it seems pretty clear that vultures help to reduce the transmission of disease at carcasses. Studies have shown that in the absence of vultures, carcasses can take at least 3 times as long and sometimes much longer to decompose. And the numbers of scavengers of other species, including rats, dogs, and so on, the time they spend at a carcass and the opportunities for disease transmission among these scavengers can increase 3-fold. So more human disease, more health costs where vultures have been lost? Well, maybe so, Some would say quite likely, although it's very hard to actually prove that. On the other hand, there is no evidence that they are significant vectors of disease, as they are sometimes accused. But sadly also, they're not immune to diseases either. Despite their digestive abilities, they still get sick. But all in all, they're just a species we can't afford to lose. But the old stereotypes do die hard. Cartoons like this, or captions or photographs depicting vultures as profiting from human death and misery are still found and often associated with the current pandemic. It's disappointing, and it's poorly informed, and part of our job would be to see the back of this type of cartoon. So they're in trouble, as I say. There's a quick summary of the diversity of vultures in Africa and Eurasia and their status. And you see from the little orange and red tags, those are the IUCN Red List categories. And you will see that out of 16 species, a shocking 8 are critically endangered. That's with an extremely high probability of extinction in the near future if nothing is done. And 3 more are endangered, which is only a slightly better situation. It's an extraordinarily bad situation. So why? Well, there are many reasons, but there is one that affects nearly all of them. And that's poisoning. But mostly this is unintentional. It's to kill other animals. People don't necessarily want to kill the vultures. And it's often carnivores who attack people, or they attack livestock. It's often wild cats and dogs, or it may be feral dogs. And poisonings often cause mass deaths of vultures because of the way they feed in groups. Exposure to lead can also be a problem, mainly through ingestion of lead ammunition. And this needs more research, and we need to take a precautionary approach to all these. So for lead hunters and land managers, many of them support a switch to lead-free ammunition, and let's get behind that. And for this and other poisons, carcass management guidelines exist in many places, and that will help us to control the problems where poisoning occurs. But poisoning can be intentional, targeting the vultures directly, and you're going to hear more about that later. And as if poisoning weren't enough, there are threats to do with electrocution and collision on energy infrastructure. Of course, habitat degradation and loss of food is occurring very widely. Colonies are disturbed. Sometimes hunting takes place illegally, shooting, and there are other problems. So the vultures are really up against it. So let's look at South Asia first, because this was the scene of the first vulture crisis, to see some of these problems unfurling. Let's go back a few decades. White-rumped vulture, South and Southeast Asia, was once the commonest large bird of prey in the world, and there were an estimated 40 million vultures of 4 species living in South Asia. And they thrived. They lived in an environment known for its very high human populations and very high impacts on habitats and ecosystems. And yet there were 40 million of them. And that's mainly because of the abundance of food in the form of cattle and other carcasses that were placed at sites outside most towns and cities. This was a reliable, safe source of food, and there was no significant persecution. But now, all 4 species are critically endangered. Now, why is that? 3 species endemic to South and Southeast Asia in the Gyps genus began to decline in the mid-1990s, and they were going down at rates of up to 50% per year. And then the 4th species, the red-headed vulture, was also later determined to have suffered similar declines. So all 4 species became the focus of determined conservation efforts across their historical range. But what to do? We didn't know why. Why were they crashing? So we had to find out. So the cause was found, and it was unintentional poisoning by the veterinary use on cattle of the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug diclofenac, which humans also use. But the declines were continuing, and at the low point, the white-rumped vulture had undergone a population decline of 99.9% in around 15 years. That means 1 out of 1,000 had survived. So the conservation organisations pulled together, including BirdLife and its partners, and were instrumental in getting the drug diclofenac banned for veterinary use by governments across South Asia. Following this success, BirdLife became a founding partner in Saving Asia's Vultures from Extinction, SAVE consortium. And this is driving the ongoing recovery programme. So through SAVE and South Asian governments, vulture safe zones, which are areas in which threats are controlled within a 100-kilometre radius of a colony, allowing viable populations to develop. And these have now been established throughout South Asia. Captive populations have been established with successful breeding underway for all 3 of the most affected species, and releases are now taking place. So the lesson of this is apply the science-based action and the results will follow eventually. Now note the graph here. It's a happy smiley graph, but look closely at the dates. So 2003 is when the diclofenac problem was identified, and the population didn't bottom out until 2012 before starting to recover. And that's one of the most successful areas in Nepal. There are other areas where success is several years behind. So thanks to these ongoing efforts, we're managing to stabilise the population of Asia's vultures, and some are increasing, not a moment too soon. We're also working to save the last vultures in Southeast Asia from poisoning. What about Europe? A small area by comparison, but the conservation success there has made it disproportionately important for 4 species of vultures. There are lots of conservation techniques we used, both in situ and via translocations and reintroductions. So Spain in particular has shown how vultures can increase spectacularly while a country's economy also develops strongly. I mean, look at that graph, like a conservationist's dream. Up to well over 30,000 pairs of griffon vultures in Spain now. So what we see here is the importance of long-term effort. You know, there's been continuous effort throughout this period in that graph, and it's continuing. Agreeing the priorities based on good science, good legislation and enforcement, adequate funding, and the European Union has come to the fore here. Committed governments and NGO partners working together. But we can't be complacent because poisoning is still a threat in Europe. There is much more work still to be done. Now we know the problems and we've solved some of them. Can we replicate the solutions and solve the rest? Well, step forward the Convention on Migratory Species. This is a UN intergovernmental agreement, and it brings together many of the world's governments and vulture scientists and conservationists. This convention produced the Multi-Species Action Plan to conserve African Eurasian vultures. And this encompasses the whole geographical range of the vultures. It's 128 range states, no less. And it promotes concerted, collaborative and coordinated international conservation actions, because that's what we need. It's been adopted by governments all the way across the ranges, and it's being implemented in many areas. And it needs to be converted into national plans, and this is beginning to happen. Plans have to be owned by each country according to national circumstances for actions to work. So do we need this plan? Well, yes, I think we do, because only governments can bring about the types of environmental and social changes on the sort of scale that vultures need, and then civil society needs to play its part. So I said earlier, vultures are our friends. We must learn to love them if we don't already. And so must policymakers and the public. So we must spread the word in every way that we can. So advocacy for nature conservation is the name of the game. to governments, to the public, to NGOs, to communities where the vultures live and where they don't live, and to the private sector. We have to get the word out. So up to now, we've covered vultures in general and their conservation in Europe and Asia. So now it's time to hand over to Celicia, who will tell us about vultures and their conservation in Africa.
Hello everyone, I'm Celicia Chandra, the Vulture Conservation Manager for Africa at BirdLife International, speaking to you from Uchili, Nairobi. Following on from Roger's presentation on the state of Eurasian and African vultures and the work that has been done in Europe and Asia today, I'm honored to share with you a glimpse into the vultures that soar across the skies of Africa, the threats they face, and the work that the BirdLife Africa Partnership is undertaking to address these threats. As Roger shared, the 16 species of Old World vultures found across Europe, Asia, and Africa are diverse and quite threatened. Of these, 11 are found in Africa, and unfortunately, 7 of these in Africa are on the edge of extinction. As we get into the nitty-gritty of their declines, I'll share a little bit about each species. So let's start with the 6 that are endemic to Africa. First, we have the whiteback vulture. Though it is one of the most widespread and common of vultures, it is critically endangered, having suffered extremely rapid declines of approximately 90% over the last 50 years. Whiteback vultures are medium in size with white feathers along their back, hence the name. Then we have the hooded vulture, also critically endangered, with an estimated 83% decline over 3 generations. These are highly versatile scavengers, often found near human habitation, especially in West Africa, though little is known about their habits in Southern Africa. Third on my screen is the glorious repulse vulture, also known as the highest flying bird in the world, with a recorded flying height of 37,100 feet, or greater than 11,000 meters, and for those that can relate, more than double the height of Mount Kilimanjaro. Repulse nest in cliffs and are also critically endangered. They're declining at 97% over the last 50 years. Moving to the bottom left of my screen, we have the shy and smaller white-headed vulture. Often first to arrive at carcasses, it has to wait for the larger species to move off before feeding. These are also on the critically endangered list, declining at the alarming rate of 96%. Then we have the Cape vulture, which is endemic to Southern Africa and a cliff nester. The pale-looking Cape vulture arrives at carcasses with a lot of aplomb, harsh grating calls, wings outstretched to appear larger. They're considered endangered as the population declines are estimated at 92% over the last 50 years, even though some populations in South Africa are reported to be increasing. And the last of the 6 vultures only found in Africa is the palm-nut vulture. This one is of least concern, and as its name suggests, unusually for a bird of prey, it feeds mainly on the fleshy fruit husks of the oil palm and the palm fruits of the raffia palm. So that brings us to the other 5 vultures that range across Africa and Eurasia. This time, let's start at the bottom, just to be different, with the endangered lappet-faced vulture, whose populations are declining at over 80%. This quirky, gentle giant is one of the largest and most powerful of the African vultures, with a large wingspan of almost 3 meters. On the other end of the scale, we have the smaller Egyptian vulture, also endangered as it's declining across its entire range. An opportunistic feeder, it has a varied diet and has been seen to use tools such as repeatedly dropping stones to break open eggs. Then we have the bearded vulture, also known as the lammergeier, a near-threatened species that feeds mostly on bone and marrow. It is an unmistakable bird with its black sideburns and large presence that it works hard to achieve, meticulously applying dirt with its claws to get a nice orange glow befitting its status. Another large Old World vulture present in Africa is the griffon vulture. Due to its increasing populations in Europe, it is considered of least concern, though in North Africa, the populations are declining and also non-breeding. Lastly, we have the near-threatened cinereous vulture, or black vulture. This is very rarely found in Africa, with some spotty observations in Egypt and West Africa. Sadly, as Roger also shared, these ecologically important creatures are the most endangered group of birds in the world. This fact cannot be said enough. Africa's vultures are the most endangered group of birds in the world. Their declines are driven by a myriad number of cross-cutting threats, which vary from region to region. And whilst more research is needed to understand the full extent and the root causes of these declines, the situation today is divided across the following main threats. Number one is poisoning, the most pervasive of all threats and responsible for 61% of recorded vulture deaths across Africa. Poisoning happens at two levels. The first is unintentional and largely occurs as a result of human-carnivore conflict, where depredated livestock carcasses are laced with poison to kill the carnivore in retaliation. Unfortunately, vultures descend en masse and die in large numbers. Unintentional poisoning also results from lead accumulation from feeding on carcasses with lead bullets, feral dog population control measures, and cyanide runoffs from mining operations. Secondly, we have intentional poisoning. This is when poachers lace carcasses of poached animals with poison, so the location is not given away by the vultures, who act as sentinels of the sky for rangers in the field. Unintentional poisoning occurs mostly in East and Southern Africa, and intentional poisoning mostly in Southern Africa. Next, we have killing for belief-based use. Here, people trap, kill, poison vultures to sell, use their parts to cure ailments or provide them with magical powers such as foresight or long life. These are long, deep-rooted beliefs that consuming the parts of vultures imbue you with the same powers as the vultures have. This primarily happens in West Africa and is responsible for 29% of the vulture mortalities, but as you can see from the map, it happens in East Africa to an extent and Southern Africa as well. Thirdly, we have the growing and emerging threat of electrocutions and collisions. This currently accounts for 9% of vulture mortalities across Africa, but is considered a growing threat due to the increased emphasis on electrification and wind energy across the region. Lastly, we have 1% of vulture mortalities attributed to other causes such as egg harvesting, killing for meat, but overarching all of these is habitat loss and degradation. And it's hard to extract how much of the decline these drive, but we know that it leads to less food and sites, so it's affecting them as well, in addition to all these other threats we've just talked about. So what is BirdLife doing for this hugely complex issue? Our strategy is built on 4 pillars. The first being knowledge and planning, sort of understanding, monitoring populations, why are they declining, what are the threats, leading to planning. Then there's awareness raising. So awareness raising is, talking about the role and value of vultures. I often get, asked, why am I doing vulture conservation? Are they threatened? So awareness raising is super important. Linked to that is policy and advocacy, getting legislative changes around poisoning, using pesticides or more vulture-friendly policies. And lastly, there's actions on the ground to combat poisoning and all these other threats that we've just talked about. So where are we? In terms of knowledge and planning, building from the multi-species action plan, we continue to work with our partners and other stakeholders where possible to monitor vulture populations, assess threats. For example, understanding the poisoning hotspots in Kenya allowed targeting action, and understanding the grave decline in vultures led to the development of Zimbabwe and the continent's only vulture action plan. Now Nigeria and Kenya are following suit. In South Africa, work by BirdLife South Africa has helped confirm that lead bullets are indeed a cause of vulture mortalities, leading them to encourage game reserve managers and hunters associations to promote the use of lead-free ammunition. Through communications at local, national, regional, international levels using various media, as you can see, awareness of the crisis has been raised. At the local level, documentaries have been produced in Burkina Faso and Nigeria, but maybe more importantly, across places like Kenya, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Zambia, local ambassadors have emerged to share their knowledge and understanding of the role and value of vultures with their communities, and they've become very valuable allies for vultures. Furthermore, we have formed critical collaborations with stakeholders such as Project Ranger, which help raise the plight of vultures and the need for their conservation amongst different stakeholders and audiences. On the advocacy front, much work has gone into instituting vulture-friendly policies in the various range states, including the national action plans discussed before, but also through engaging with regional entities such as ECOWAS and international bodies such as CITES to raise the issues of illegal wildlife trade of vultures, for instance. Then, building on this knowledge, awareness, advocacy, conservations on the ground have also been trialed. Actions to combat poisoning have largely been implemented in East and Southern Africa, with the deployment of rapid and coordinated response mechanisms with key stakeholders to reduce mortalities from a poisoning incident. This, alongside with community engagement and education initiatives, raises the awareness of the dangers of using toxins, and that it's illegal, the illegal killing of wildlife, has helping to reduce incidences of poisoning. So looking at it at both reducing mortalities from poisoning and trying to reduce poisoning themselves. This has included wildlife poison response training for our partners in 9 countries, development of response board protocols in 3, and associated national poisoning incident databases and countless community engagement initiatives. Initial indications from Kenya do suggest a reduction in mortalities from poisoning thanks to these coordinated efforts across stakeholders, leading BirdLife to encourage and support our partners in other regions to implement similar mechanisms. Taking a leaf from the successes in Asia, the vulture safe zone concept has been adapted to the African context. And now we have approximately 500,000 hectares of vulture safe zone established between Zambia, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. These vulture safe zones are areas free from key threats to vultures like poisoning or electrocution, particularly in areas where vultures need significant protection, and are created through encouraging and supporting key stakeholders such as land managers, landowners, and community members. While it may be still too early to tell how effective this will be, given how vultures travel huge distances, early indications show significant positive engagement from landowners to protect vultures. For example, just recently, Birdwatch Zambia received a call from a landowner who wanted to ensure that a drug he had used to treat a cow that died would not affect vultures if he laid out the meat for them. And that's positive progress. So also on the lines of creating safe spaces for vultures, our partners Grepon in Morocco runs an aviary and a rehab center built by the Department of Forestry on a key point along the vulture flyways to and from Europe called Jebel Musa. Here, vultures are provided with safe and supplementary food and treated and rehabilitated as needed. Most recently, rewilded griffon vultures from this aviary were observed breeding in the wild in Morocco for the first time after 40 years. To mitigate the effects of poor energy infrastructure, BirdLife partners have also worked to identify dangerous power lines. This has happened in Morocco and Ethiopia. And in Ethiopia, a quadripartite MOU has been signed with relevant authorities and NGOs to retrofit power lines and provide bird-safe energy. This has also been complemented by a wide-ranging communications program on the role and value of vultures, as well as the need for bird-safe energy. In Kenya, BirdLife International are coordinating a group of bird conservation organizations to implement a biodiversity offset action plan to ensure that the wind farm sited near vulture colonies results in an overall net gain for vultures. Lastly, we've also started to work on demand reduction strategies to address the killing of vultures for belief-based use. Our partners in Nigeria and Zimbabwe are engaging with traditional healers to understand the demands for vulture parts and promote the use of alternatives. And while the work in Zimbabwe is still at its nascent stages, Nigeria has made some good progress towards implementing actions, which my colleague, Dr. Joseph Anoja, will tell you all about. Additionally, we're also working to understand the trade routes, drivers, and motivations for killing of vultures in Guinea-Bissau, Gambia, and Senegal, following the mass deaths in the sub-region over the last 2 years. 5 years into our strategic action plan, the BirdLife Africa Partnership has made progress in implementing its strategy. And while we know the journey has just begun, we are in it for the long run to help Africa's vultures soar again. So thank you, BirdLife South Africa, for affording us this opportunity to share our work with all of you. And now on to Joseph to share with us NCF's work in addressing belief-based use in Nigeria. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Joseph Onoja, and I'm the Director of Technical Programs of the Nigerian Conservation Foundation. Today, I want to talk to you on the vulture conservation in Nigeria, combating illegal wildlife trade. We know that globally, the population of vultures have suffered a remarkable decline, recording over 95% of decline. And this decline is due to poisoning, death from diphenol biomagnification, and the use of vulture parts in traditional medicine, depending on what part of the world you are. And in Africa, we have seen 11 species of these vultures have suffered this decline. It has been shown that 6 out of the 11 species are actually at the brink of extinction. And according to BirdLife, this decline has tremendous impact on human health and the economy, as has been pointed out by my colleague Roger in his last discussion. And in Nigeria, the vulture population also has witnessed remarkable decline, both in protected and unprotected area, and this is quite disturbing. In a study that was carried out in 2008, showed that in Yankari Game Reserve, that all the vultures that were recorded in the early 80s, only 2 were found during that survey, and they were found as very few individuals. And a similar survey was carried out in 2013 around unprotected areas of Yankari Game Reserve, and we saw that the decline also was in unprotected areas. And this marked decline, especially for the hooded vulture population, was thought to be imperceptible because of its cosmopolitan nature. However, it took IUCN 5 years to just move it from least concern to critically endangered, showing how remarkable the decline has been. This is because the hooded vulture declined more than 95% of its population. And it was thought, especially in Nigeria, that it was led by the use in traditional medicine. Others can be poisoning in abattoirs, extraction of their egg, destruction of their habitat because of they couldn't find nesting sites, and the poor perception that locals have about them, looking at them as evil birds. And we're worried by this deleterious trend on the population of vulture as NCF, and we took deliberate steps to reverse this trend globally by acting locally here in Nigeria. So in 2015, we developed an action plan, what we call the Advocacy Action Plan, where we're able to look at what we can do, actions that we can take to ensure that we reverse the trend of vulture population decline in Nigeria. So with the help of the Leventis Foundation, we partnered with the BirdLife African Secretariat, and we implemented a project called the Vulture Decline in West Africa, breaking the trend through stakeholders engagement between 2017 and 2018. So this project was a pioneering effort to engage stakeholders within the wildlife trade value chain in Nigeria. It provided a foundational knowledge for us to understand what is the most critical issues around the socioeconomic value chain driving illegal wildlife trade in Nigeria, and belief-based use was looked at as a chief driver, because we visited about 17 wildlife markets in southwestern part of Nigerian states of Osun, Ogun, and Ondo states. And then we looked at 3,000 actors, both active ones and non-active ones. And then we also engaged the state government, ministries, departments, and agencies, law enforcement agents, transportation union, traditional healers association, research, and tertiary institutions. We also engaged the media and the general public as well. The market assessment revealed that vulture parts have local and international trade routes, looking at Kano in Nigeria, Cameroon, Niger Republic, and even as far as west as Burkina Faso. And we found out that a live vulture costs about 85 to 140 US dollars, while a dead one is 40 to 60 US dollars, depending on the location and the availability at that time. These are some of the pictures that we were able to source from the markets when we did that. And we also have some wildlife parts as well, not to show that it's not only vulture parts that have been sold, but I mentioned that we are looking at wildlife trade in general, but looking at vultures as our flagship species. The demand for African vulture and its parts is very high, which is largely driven by belief-based use. And this project also shows that border agency and other law enforcement agents also lack the requisite knowledge to combat this wildlife crime. And the project, to a large extent, was able to create some level of awareness amongst the targeted stakeholders. We did that through the 15 dialogue sessions that we have, three stakeholders workshop that we also organized. We had jingles in both radio and video and television documentary. We had other print media appearance as well that we also had Save the Vulture campaign at the end of the project. This campaign reached out also as an estimate of 1 million people in trying to change their behavior towards or their perception towards vulture. And the project was a pioneer effort in tackling illegal wildlife trade in Nigeria, especially when it comes to vulture species conservation. However, a much holistic intervention needs to be done as we understand the socio-economic and ecological role vulture play in our society. That is highly needed. We also look at strengthening capacity and awareness of law enforcement agencies as a major priority for us, so that we domesticate the CITES Endangered Species Act of 2016 at both the national and subnational level, especially because that is where most of these atrocities are being carried out. So that led us to collaborate with our colleagues in the Balkan and across the flyway of the Egyptian vulture to start the EU Live Egyptian Vulture project. And this project sought to increase the conservation of the only migratory vulture species between Europe and Africa, that is the Egyptian vulture, and which fitted nicely into NTF's advocacy plan and serve as a continuation for us to continue to engage stakeholders. The main objective of the project is to reduce adult mortality through persecution for traditional medicine and to increase the awareness and support the conservation of Egyptian vulture and other vulture species as well. So we visited 10 wildlife markets in the north. Earlier on we did out of southwest, but this time around we did in the north, looking at Sokoto and Kano states. While in Kano state, we visited 4 wildlife markets involving 12 shops. Over 500 wildlife shops were also seen. Hooded vulture or white-backed vulture, which is popularly called ungulu or kolo, we had similar prices as well as the one we found in the southwest, between 12 to 100 euros, depending on who is buying, because sometimes the clientele also determine the price. And we saw that this trade is actually being inherited. We found a situation of about three generations of people involved in this trade. A mother, her daughter, and her granddaughter all having stalls beside themselves. And the uses that we found out was that they used for rituals, ritual rites to cure evil attack, hunted for domestic food and good protein supplement. The vulture egg is used for money-making ritual to cure madness as well. And as usual, the sources are from Niger Republic, Chad, Jigawa State, Yobe State, Katsina, River State, while they are also sold in Ibadan, Lagos, and Abuja. And we found that there are other wildlife products also, from birds, from passerine birds to other raptors, and also to reptiles and other species. And the method of harvesting is through trapping for those who want live supply, and then the poisoning for dead supply, while dead and the parts of supply we can come from shooting. And these are the various pictures that we're able to see. This is droppings from vulture species, and they are the various parts as we see them. These are live white-backed vulture and hooded vulture as seen. And in Kebbi and Sokoto State, we also had the same issues, the similar trend with what we saw from other markets. But this one had an international market there where these had been sold. While we were engaging them, we also looked at possible plant alternatives, especially as we engage the National Association of Nigerian Traditional Medicine practitioners. And they were open to finding plant alternatives since the raw material is not available for them, readily available as it used to. We also looked at data collection, as with the veterinary collection that we had. We saw about 23 drugs were identified, mostly antibiotics. And let me say here that diclofenac has been officially banned, but through the black markets, it still finds its way into the hands of these rearers. Main drivers for poisoning use are feral drug control, that's feral dog control of wild carnivores population, and also poisoning at rubbish dumps. So we try to create that. We did awareness communication, especially through school children, looking at World Wetlands Day event. We use that opportunity, even International Vulture Day event as well, Awareness Creation Day, we use that as well. And in terms of, we've had billboards in the airports trying to create awareness both for local and international travelers. And we also have a mile for vultures, Egyptian vultures and other vulture species, just to create awareness. We had a cycling event. So to build up on that, we got the U.S. Fish and Wildlife grant on combating the West African illegal trade in threatened vultures and their parts for belief-based use. It was a follow-up to the wildlife work that we are doing in Nigeria. Nigeria is known as a hotspot for exporting illegally sourced wildlife products, and the main goal of the project is to reduce by 20% the illegal trade of vulture parts from highly threatened African vultures by 2021, which is the build-up of what we have been doing. And this is being done through the improvement of capacity of special criminal investigation agencies to monitor, investigate, and prosecute illegal wildlife trade-related crimes. And we're looking at that through the implementation of the Vulture MS app and the African Common Strategy for Illegal Wildlife Trade in Nigeria, and also to enhance public awareness at the national and regional level on the social, economic, and ecological impacts of illegal trade in birds and wildlife. So far, we have engaged travel healers and hunters on seeking alternatives to vulture part, which looks promising as there are discussions with the end users to use these more available alternatives. Now, we're looking at this because we know that it can be used, the plant-based alternatives are readily available and they can be sourced locally, while we try to convince and change behavior. Behavioral change, the use of, or belief, to change belief is a very difficult thing, but we're trying to see how we can switch them to be able to use other alternatives. And then in what we started, that's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife grant at the project inception, which held on the 8th of May 2019, we had 80 participants that included law enforcement agencies, the Nigerian Custom, the other National Park Service, Federal Ministry of Environment was there, the CITES focal point. We have wildlife trade. We have British High Commission and the U.S. embassies were represented, and we have the Trado healers as well as the Ministry of Justice. And to follow up on that, we had a baseline study in another market of Oyo and Ogun states, and then we found that 100 stalls were visited in these two states, and we cited hooded vultures, lappet-faced vultures, palm-nut vulture, and other species as well, including tortoise, baboon, gorilla, pangolin, and so on, because we are looking at generally how to combat illegal wildlife trade, but using vultures as our flagship species. And the stakeholder workshop also with traditional medicine practitioners was held in Kano to find plant-based alternatives, as I mentioned earlier. Also, veterinary practitioners were also engaged and participated in the workshop, and were identified special plants that can be used for this, so that by the time we are able to do this, we'll be able to move people's attention from vultures, but using sources that are readily available. And one of the ways also that we continue to push is to engage what we call the celebrities, our different celebrities, music stars, online personalities, so that we will be able to, because they have huge following, so that we'll be able to use them as ambassadors, so that by the time they post things and they're able to create more awareness, their following, which is huge, will be able to be convinced, and people also will be aware of the importance of vultures in our environment. And so far, this has really helped us, and we are seeing mileage in trying to do this. So we are pushing forward. We are not relenting in our efforts to ensure that vultures are protected here in Nigeria, and their conservation status is highlighted as we look at not just vulture conservation, but other wildlife as well. So I want to thank you very much for listening, and hoping that you have learned something from the implementation of vulture conservation here in Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Lebo. Thank you so much, panelists, for an informative presentation. The future of African vultures is in our hands. Let us join as Africans in saving this group of birds. Let me take this opportunity in thanking our platinum sponsors, iTelltale, Ford Wildlife Foundation, MSC Cruises, Zeiss, and AA for making this event possible. Okay, we are going on a 30-minute break. We'll be back at 5 p.m. for a keynote talk by the urban birder, David Lindo. Please remember, you have to purchase the ticket for this event and be logged with your account in order for you to view the presentation. During the tea break, please do not forget to visit our exhibitors booth and silent auctions. Cheers.